Welcome to this webinar. My name is Pierre Lebel, and I am the Education Officer in the National Capital Region. This webinar was presented on Monday, April 6th to local executives in the region. We ran into several technical problems, so we redid the webinar, and this is the version you will see and hear. After this short introduction, Magali Picard, the National Executive Vice President, will say a few words. Magali will then turn the presentation over to Marc Belland. Marc is the Health and Safety Officer for the NCR. Marc will go through a PowerPoint presentation that will be approximately 20 minutes. Once his presentation is over, Marc will go through several questions that were asked during the original webinar. This part should be about 10 minutes. Finally, Magali will say a few words at the end of the presentation. In addition to the responses given during this webinar, Marc will go through the written questions that were asked by the participants. Staff at the regional office will either contact the members directly, or we will post this question and answer on the regional website on the Health and Safety page. You should visit the PSAC NCR website for updates and other webinars. Thank you. Now we'll hear Magali.
Thank you, Pierre. Thank you to all of you for being with us today. We're going through something that we never thought it would happen in our life. There's no precedent to what we're going through right now. The level of stress in the society is at the maximum. And you know as me that it's the same within our membership. So I really want to thank you for being a volunteer to help your colleague, to give them the right information. That's, you know, health and safety always been one of the priority of the union, but I'm telling you right now, that's the top priority. So I'm counting on you. I really want to thank you for being there. Do not hesitate. Pierre was telling you we won't be, our facilitators won't be able to answer all your questions, but I'm sure that if you send those questions, you will receive an answer. And Pierre, maybe all the answers should be put in a Q&A and sent to all the participants, because I'm sure if one of you got a question that maybe other people will benefit of the answers. So again, I hope that everyone is safe. I will hope you will enjoy, you will learn from this presentation. And I'm pretty sure if we stick together, we're gonna go through it and we will succeed. But for now, it's really a difficult period. And again, I wanna thank you for helping our membership to go through it with the best information. So that's it. I will have the chance to give you some words at the end of this presentation. So thanks again, and Pierre, I'm back to you.
Good day, everybody, and welcome to this webinar on pandemics and health and safety and the right to refuse dangerous work. So the objectives for today are to look at the definition of COVID-19, to look at the employer's responsibilities regarding pandemics vis-a-vis the Canada Labour Code, the Ontario Occupational Health and Safety Act, and the Quebec Occupational Health and Safety Act. We're going to look at the rights and responsibilities of employees, and we're also going to look at to identify some support and redress mechanisms regarding right to refuse dangerous work. So coronaviruses are a large family of viruses that are usually associated with mild illnesses similar to the common cold. The novel coronavirus is a new strain that had not been previously identified in humans. So in humans, the coronaviruses cause infections of the nose, throats, and lungs, and they're commonly spread from one infected person through another. That's done through the droplets from respiratory tract, and that's usually generated when coughing or sneezing, through close and prolonged personal contact, such as touching, shaking hands with an infected person, or touching a surface, and then touching your face. That's how the virus enters your body. So some things that you can do to protect yourself: wash your hands for at least 20 seconds, several times a day. Avoid touching your face. Don't touch anything you don't have to, especially in public areas. Avoid non-essential travel. Clean highly touched surfaces frequently, and practice social distancing of at least 2 meters away from other people. So social distancing is the reason that's being suggested is to ensure that any droplets that might be coming out of another person does not enter your respiratory tract and infect you should they have the virus. Now, it's also important to note that not everybody who carries the virus is symptomatic, which means that you may not have symptoms, but you might be infected with the virus. That's another reason why physical or social distancing is required. Some of the tools that we use for social distancing are such as we're doing today: webinars, telephone, video conferencing, using the internet as much as possible. And at this point, also a lot of workplaces are closed, and only essential or critical employees to the operations of the workplace are allowed into the workplace. So let's look at your rights under the Canada Labour Code and the Provincial Occupational Health and Safety Acts. So in the Canada Labour Code, the Federal Act, the definition of danger is defined as follows. It's any hazard, condition, or activity that could reasonably be expected to be an imminent or serious threat to the life or health of a person exposed to it before the hazard or condition can be corrected or the activity altered. Two words that are very important in this definition are the words imminent and serious. This waters down, unfortunately, our protection under the Canada Labour Code because the threat has to be imminent or serious for you to exercise your right to refuse. We're going to go into this a little further. But before we go into the refusal to work process, let's look at the preventative measures that are required under the Canada Labour Code. So the purpose of the Canada Labour Code Part 2 under Section 122.1 is to prevent accidents and injuries arising out of and linked with and occurring or in the course of employment. Preventative measures should also consist first of the elimination of the hazard, then the reduction of the hazard, or as we commonly call administrative measures, and then finally the provisions or the use of personal protective equipment, PPE. It's important that we retain this premise because these are the steps in that order that the employer should take to protect you from any hazards present in the workplace. Section 124 is called the General Duty Clause. So this clause says that the employer has to protect you at work and protect your health and safety while you're at work or doing work for the employer. So in this regards, the employer cannot argue in front of a court that they didn't know they had to protect you, and so on and so forth. So in Section 125, these are the specific duties of the employer. There are several of them. I won't go through all of them, but we'll look at a few of them as we go along. For example, the employer has to provide sanitary and personal facilities, and that's defined in Regulation 9 of the Canadian Occupational Health and Safety Regulations. The employer has to ensure that the appropriate levels of ventilation, lighting, and temperature are in accordance with the prescribed standards, and those can also be found in the regulations. In subsection S, the employer has to ensure that each employee is made aware of every known and foreseeable health and safety hazard where you work. So again, these are specific duties of the employer. Under the Ontario Occupational Health and Safety Act, the same duties are found in Section 125, where there's the General Duty Clause, where the employer has to take all reasonable precautions to protect your health and safety at work, ensure the equipment, materials, and protective equipment are maintained in good condition, and so on and so forth. Some of the other specific duties of the employer under the Ontario Act is that they have to comply with every regulation made under the Occupational Health and Safety Act. And Section 126 of the Act talks about additional duties that are prescribed in the regulations to the employer. Under the Quebec Occupational Health and Safety Act, the same duties can be found under Division 2, Chapter 51, where the employer must take the necessary measures to protect the health and ensure the safety and physical well-being of the workers. And again, similar to the other two acts, we get into the specific duties of the employer that they have to do to protect the workers under the Quebec Act. Under the Federal Act, it's important to note that in Z03 and Z04, the employer, when the employer does an assessment of hazards that are present or could be present in the workplace, this work has to be done with the participation of and the consultation of the policy committee and the workplace committee. Failing those two, if it's a smaller workplace, it's also has to be done with the participation and the consultation of the health and safety representative. Let's now talk about your right to refuse dangerous work. Under the Federal Act, Section 128 is the section that speaks about the right to refuse dangerous work. Now, any employee may exercise their right to refuse to do dangerous work. You may refuse to use a machine or thing if there's a condition that exists in the workplace, or that you may want to exercise your right to refuse for the performance of an activity or part of an activity that might be present in the workplace. Under the Ontario Act, it's Article 43 that gives the right to refuse to the workers, and it's similar in nature to the Federal Act. And in Quebec, it's Article 12 that gives the workers the right to refuse dangerous work. So the steps to follow under the Federal Labor Code for the right to refuse are as follows. So once an employee determines that there's a danger present in the workplace, then the worker will advise his or her supervisor of the danger. Then an investigation will take place between the supervisor and the worker. And the results of this investigation, if the employer agrees that a danger exists, then the employer will put in place some preventative measures to rectify, to eliminate the danger. If the worker agrees with the findings of danger and the preventative measures put in place by the employer, then the issue is resolved. If the employee is not satisfied with either the finding of no danger or the preventative measures put in place by the employer, then the employer will advise the Health and Safety Committee, who will then conduct an investigation. The Health and Safety Committee will appoint two people to investigate, one from the employee side and one from the employer side. Once this investigation has taken place, the Workplace Committee will provide the employer with a written report with their findings. Then the employer will provide the refusing employee with their report, with the report of the committee, and also their opinion on the findings of the committee, whether or not they agree with the findings of the committee, and if they do agree, what preventative measures they will put in place, or if they don't agree, meaning that the employer still maintains that there is no danger for the worker. Once that's done, then the worker, if the worker maintains the right to refuse, then the employer will advise the Minister of Labor and submit the investigation report and from the Workplace Committee to the Minister of Labor. Once that's done, then the minister will decide whether or not they're going to investigate the right to refuse. once that's done, if the Ministry of Labor agrees to investigate, then a health and safety officer from the labor program will be assigned the file to investigate. And then at the end of that process, he or she will make a determination of danger or no danger. Should a definition of danger take place, the health and safety officer will issue a direction to the employer, giving the employer a certain amount of time, usually not long, to rectify the danger. If there's a decision of no danger, the issue is closed and you must return to work. In either case, the employer and the worker have the right to appeal the decision of the health and safety officer of the labor program through the Federal Public Service Employee Relations Board. If you know of a member that his or her file comes to this point, please get in touch with myself at the local regional office, and I'll be more than happy to assist the member in filing the appeal. It's crucial that you remember that the appeal process time limit is only 30 days from the date of the letter. So it's very important that if you do get a decision of no danger from the Ministry of Labor, that you advise us as soon as possible. Now let's talk briefly about the concept of inherent risk and normal condition of employment. Inherent risk would apply in jobs like Federal Border Services agents, police officers, firefighters, paramedics. People are normally assigned work that could or is very different than the normal population. So these people are exposed to different risks, and that's called an inherent risk. Also, it's also called in the labor jargon as normal condition of employment. So if the employer or the labor program comes to such a decision, please let us know and we'll assist you in navigating that process. On a slide currently on the screen, you can see a pictogram flow chart of the Federal Labor Code right to refuse dangerous work process. You can print that slide and carry it with you, and obviously share it with the membership in order to ensure that the process is easy to carry. And then there's a references to the different sections of Section 128 of the Act. Section 147 of the Federal Canada Labor Code talks about disciplinary measures. It's important to note that no employer may discipline a worker, and there's a whole definition here on the screen under Section 147. The employer cannot take any actions against you because you either exercise your right to refuse or avail yourselves of your rights under the Canada Labor Code. Section 133 of the code talks about how to file the complaint to the Federal Public Service Employee Relations Board. If you have a member that wishes to file a complaint of this nature, please get in touch with myself and I'll assist the worker in that regards. So some of the preventative tools that an employer should have in place right now, evidently under the code and the regulations, the employer has to have hand washing facilities. When that's not sufficient enough, especially we can think of the members that may work at Service Canada or Passport Canada or anybody dealing with the public for that matter. Alcohol-based disinfectant may be a good product to have on hand so that the workers can disinfect their hands when dealing with the public. A more frequent disinfection with soap and water or industrial soaps, evidently for desks, surfaces, door handles, and so on and so forth. Ventilation is important to ensure that any types of airborne particulates are exhausted from the workplace. And then last but not least, obviously, personal protective equipment when there's no other option available. And we've seen some workplaces where they've added windows in between the workers and the public, and so on and so forth. That's another good tool to use. And any measures that the employer puts in place, including personal protective equipment, the employer must train you on the proper use of the equipment and the risks associated with dealing with the public or putting yourselves at risk in that regards. The famous question of essential and critical. Treasury Board came out with a definition a few weeks ago when all this started. And ideally, hopefully, most of the workplaces are allowing the workers to work from home or telework. The definition of essential is usually used in cases of labor disputes or strikes, and the definition of critical, which was clarified by the Treasury Board, is that the work of that person is critical to the operations of the department and or services to Canadians. So if you do have an issue with that definition, I would suggest that you contact your component or your local to obtain further help in this regards. So some tips, if you're teleworking right now, you may want to have a separate room where it's easier for you to concentrate and have a reduction of distractions. You may want to have a room that provides a level of security that is required by your employer. Necessary telephone lines and answering machine or voicemail as required by your employer. Control over temperature, light, and sound. You control that even though your employer is responsible for you. If you're teleworking, you have to maintain your workplace accordingly. And ergonomically safe. We will talk about that a little further in the presentation. Regarding mental health, we have to understand the fight or flight response. Maybe advise the members to be selective about the different news sources to ensure that they're getting the real news and not the fake news. To consider practical and the value of the information they're obtaining. Also, feel free to discuss, and it's always good to discuss matters with colleagues and coworkers, even if it's just a touch base to see how they're doing, and vice versa. And set yourself boundaries on news consumption so you don't tire yourself out with all the information. Some useful websites that are on the next slide is evidently the PSAC National Union website, the Health Canada website, the Center for Expertise on Mental Health in the Workplace for those of you with Treasury Board, the Canada Labour Code, the Ontario Occupational Health and Safety Act, the Quebec Act for Health and Safety, the Canadian Center for Occupational Health and Safety. The PSAC has lobbied and the CCOHS has agreed to put a lot of their documentation and courses on for free right now. So if you go on their website, you can log in, create an account, and take training for free that usually would cost $125, $150 per person. For ergonomy, also, the CCOHS has a lot of information, and here we have the link to the Mayo Clinic also. This concludes my presentation at this time, and now I'll go through some of the questions.
Thank you, Mark, for your presentation. So right now we'll go through some of the questions that were asked during the original webinar on Monday. So Mark, go ahead.
Thank you, Pierre. Now I'll go through some of the questions. So the first question is, does the employer have the right to demand to be informed if an employee has contracted COVID-19? That's a very technical question, and we received legal advice whereby we feel that the legal advice we receive suggests that an employer can request this information, more so if you're in the workplace, maybe not as much if you're teleworking, But at some point, evidently because the COVID-19 is a communicable disease, if you have been diagnosed with it, the public health authority will most likely advise the employer anyhow. Next question, in a work refusal situation, which form should be filled out and by whom? So there's no form to complete at the beginning of a work refusal. You simply advise your supervisor verbally or in writing, if you wish, of the work refusal. If it's a continued work refusal and the matter is being referred to the labor program, the employer will have a form to complete and send to them, but you the members, don't have to complete a form. Next question. If you're teleworking and you suffer an injury at home, would you be covered under the WSIB for Ontario or CNSST for Quebec? The code protects you in the sense that wherever you perform work for the employer, the Canada Labour Code applies. It gets, and there is jurisprudence in both provinces for teleworking also, that if you're doing work for your employer, you're covered. But evidently, if you're taking a break and you decide to go outside and you fall down the stairs, that might be another problem for us to advise to win a file. But either way, when in doubt, file a claim, and we'll deal with it as we go along with the appropriate provincial authority. Next question. If you exercise your right to refuse, are you refusing for the whole job or just part of it? Or can you refuse for part of it? So the answer to that question is you can refuse to do the job itself, or you can refuse to do a part of a job. For example, if you're a CBSA officer, you might be able to do your functions, but you may not want to deal with the public for whatever reason. So this would be an example where you would refuse part of a job of dealing with the public. Next question. The employer has sent a form for all employees to complete on the reporting of COVID-19. Is the employer permitted to request such form? This becomes more of a labor relations question in itself, whereas the employer is blanket requesting all the members to complete a form, or is mandating all the workers to complete a form and to send it in. I would suggest that you contact your component to get an answer to that. Under the Canada Labour Code, mind you, is silent on that issue. So as I said, I think this is more of a labor relations question. Next question. The employers are to provide a prevention plan, and where can the employees verify these plans and if they are sound? So a while back, I mentioned that the employer hazard prevention program must be created with the participation of and consultation of the policy committee and the workplace committee. So if you want to see those prevention plans, ask your local committee or your policy committee for a copy. And if you detect any failures in those prevention plans, I suggest you contact your committee for them to address it with the employer. Next question. Are the workplace health and safety committees required to continue to meet during this pandemic? Well, there's nothing that precludes the workplace committees or the policy committee from meeting, and in fact, it's probably the most important time right now for them to be meeting. As you know, under the code, the policy committee has to meet for a minimum of 4 times a year, and the workplace committees have to meet for a minimum of 9 times a year. There's no exclusions to those. And in fact, if the workplace is actually occupied, it's crucially more important for the committees to meet. And evidently, the policy committee should be meeting, if they haven't already, since the start of the pandemic, to find out what's going on in the workplaces across the country and to suggest preventative tools for the employer to put in place. That brings me to the end of the question and to the end of the webinar.
Thank you, Mark. What we'll do, if you bear with me, we'll go through, I will show you two of the websites that Mark referred to, the PSAC regional website and the PSAC national, and then we'll have Magali to say a few words. So I'll do that right away. So, okay, so first is the PSAC original page. If you go to PSAC-ncr.com and you click on health and safety, you'll find different resources that we talked about during this presentation. So you can click and and we have a French version as well. And if I go right now on the PSAC national website, that's exactly the same. We have a lot of information about the COVID and your rights at work and everything. And so before we leave the Magali to say a few words, I just want to make sure that let me check. Okay, we'll go through it. Voilà. Okay, so yeah, so Magali will say a final words. And so visit the PSAC regional website often. So we'll add new webinars. You will be sent an invitation by email anyway. But if you make sure that you visit our regional website so you can have more information. And I will ask now Magali to say a few words. And once Magali will have said, that will conclude that webinar. So once again, thank you to having listened. Thank you, Mark, for your presentation. Thank you for having listened to that webinar, and stay tuned on the PSAC regional and national website for more information during that pandemic. Thank you. Have a nice day. So Magali, if you want to say a few words.
Yes, for sure. Thank you, Pierre. Thank you very much, Mark. Thank you, Pierre, for organizing that today. Really interesting. Thank you to all of you for attending. Thank you for your questions. And I hope you're going to be safe. I hope you're taking care of yourself and your families. Really important. Like I said, solidarity, it's more important now than ever. So I'm really glad to hear that there were so many people today. I really appreciate your help, your support, your involvement within the union. We're lucky to have you. It's a really difficult period, but we have to stay positive. We have to share the right information. We have to be there to support our people. And I'm sure that we're going to go through it and we will succeed after this pandemic. So again, I want to thank you. I'm hearing that in other provinces, some of the people like you responsible for health and safety ask for webinar regarding mental health. So that's probably something that Pierre and Mark are looking at. So we will organize more of those presentations. And if you have any idea, question, suggestion, do not hesitate. Like I said, we're going to work on every kind of subject together. So please, if you say, I need information on something, or I need help on something, I was hearing Mark saying, if you have a file, please do not hesitate to come and ask me questions, write me, call me. So that's really important. We've got beautiful people who are there to help. And like I said, with you, we will be successful. So thank you very much again.